It was a quiet morning in a small neighborhood where the streets were cracked, the walls of houses were faded, and the sounds of life were simple and ordinary. Children ran along the uneven paths, laughing and shouting as they chased each other, their bare feet kicking up small clouds of dust. Among them was a young boy, no more than 10 years old, whose life was already filled with challenges that most adults would struggle to face. His clothes were worn, patched in places where they had torn long ago, and his shoes were so old that the soles had started to come apart. Still, there was a light in his eyes, a kind of hope that refused to fade even when the world seemed heavy. The boy had a small bike, one he had received from a distant relative years ago. It was not new, not even close, and it had been through a lot. The paint was scratched and chipped, the chain sometimes slipped off, and the tires were barely holding air. That bike had become more than a mode of transport for him. It was his freedom. It took him to school, to the market, and sometimes just around the neighborhood when he wanted to forget the heaviness of life for a little while. But one morning, when he tried to ride it to school, the chain snapped completely. He tried fixing it with a piece of wire he found at home, but it only made the problem worse. The bike now sat at the edge of the street, useless and mocking. While the boy's heart sank, he looked around, hoping to find someone who could help. But most adults were busy with their work, their own problems pressing down on them. It seemed like nobody had the time or patience to fix an old bike for a poor boy. And yet he had heard stories about a man who lived a few streets away, a mechanic who could fix anything. People spoke about him with respect. They said he was quiet but kind, and that he never charged much, sometimes even giving free help to those who truly needed it. But the boy had never met him. He didn't know if the stories were true, and he wasn't sure if he had the courage to ask for help. Pride and fear of rejection made him hesitate. After pacing back and forth, he finally decided to try. He pushed the bike slowly along the dusty road until he reached the small shop tucked between two larger buildings. The shop was simple, with a corrugated roof that rattled softly in the wind and tools hanging neatly along the walls. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, mixed with the warmth of the morning sun. Behind the counter stood the mechanic, a tall man with broad shoulders and strong hands. His skin was dark like polished wood, and his eyes were calm but sharp, taking in everything at once. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, and his hands had the kind of calluses that only come from years of hard work. The boy hesitated at the doorway, clutching the handlebars of his broken bike. His voice came out soft and uncertain. "Excuse me, sir. Could you fix my bike?" The mechanic looked at him, studying him for a moment. He noticed the worn clothes, the dusty face, the way the boy's eyes were filled with both hope and fear. There was something about him, a kind of honesty that was rare these days. Without saying a word, he gestured for the boy to bring the bike inside. The boy's heart lifted a little as he wheeled the bike into the small workshop. Tools clanged and rattled as the mechanic inspected every part carefully. He worked quickly but with care, turning screws, adjusting the chain and oiling the parts that had been rusted from years of neglect. The boy watched silently, fascinated by the ease with which the man moved his hands and the confidence in his actions. It almost felt like magic. As the mechanic worked, he spoke, not unkindly. "It's been through a lot, hasn't it?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir, I need it for school. I don't have money to buy a new one." The mechanic didn't respond at first. He kept working, tightening a bolt here, adjusting a pedal there. Then he looked up and said, "You know, it's not always about money. Some things are worth helping with just because it's the right thing to do." The boy blinked, surprised. He had expected to be told to come back with coins or to be refused altogether. But here was someone willing to help him without asking for anything in return. He felt a warmth in his chest, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. By the time the sun was higher in the sky, the bike was fixed. The chain ran smoothly, the tires were properly inflated, and the pedals moved without squeaking. It looked almost new considering its age. The boy hopped on, turning the pedals experimentally. Everything worked perfectly. He could hardly believe it. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. I don't know how to pay you." The mechanic shook his head. "You don't need to. Just promise me one thing. Take care of it, and when you get the chance, help someone else. That's payment enough." The boy nodded eagerly, tears pricking his eyes. He felt a swell of emotion he had never felt before. Here was a man, a stranger, who had given him something he needed more than anything: freedom to move, freedom to learn, and a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. He rode the bike back home slowly, taking care not to make a sound. He wanted to savor every moment, every pedal, every turn of the wheels. When he reached his small house, he ran inside, eager to tell his family. His mother, tired from a long day of work, looked at him with surprise as he hugged the bike tightly. "Where did you get this fixed?" she asked. He told her about the mechanic, about how he had worked on the bike for free, and about the promise he had made to help someone else one day. His mother smiled, a mixture of relief and admiration on her face. "That man has a good heart," she said. "Remember this and never forget that kindness exists. Maybe one day you will be able to pass it on too." That night the boy lay in bed thinking about the mechanic and the bike. He realized that life could be harsh and unfair, but small gestures of kindness could light up even the darkest moments. He thought about how different the world might be if people took a little time to help each other, just like the mechanic had helped him. In the days that followed, the boy rode his bike everywhere, not just to school but also to visit friends, run small errands, and sometimes just to feel the wind on his face. Every time he rode, he remembered the mechanic's words and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He began helping around the neighborhood in small ways, carrying groceries for an elderly neighbor, fetching water for someone who needed it, and even showing younger children how to ride their bikes safely. It wasn't much, but it was his way of honoring the kindness he had received. The mechanic continued his work quietly, helping anyone who came to him, whether they had money or not. He never asked for recognition and never expected thanks. Yet unknowingly he had planted a seed in the boy, a seed that would grow over the years into something powerful. That single act of fixing a bike for free had done more than mend metal and rubber. It had sparked hope, courage, and determination in a young heart that had known too much struggle. And for the boy, that day became more than a memory. It became a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. It taught him that kindness could change a person's path, that even the smallest gesture could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he climbed back onto that bike marked the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead him to a place where he could change not only his own life but also the life of the man who had once helped him without expecting anything in return. As the sun set over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the cracked streets, the boy leaned his bike against the wall and looked at it with pride. It was more than a bicycle now. It was a symbol of possibility, of hope, and of the quiet power of human kindness. And somewhere in the distance, in his little workshop filled with tools and memories, the mechanic worked on another project, unaware that a young boy's life had been forever changed by his generosity that morning. Little did they know, years later their paths would cross again, but this time, the boy, now a young man, would have the chance to repay that kindness in a way that would leave both of them forever changed. After the day the mechanic had fixed his bike for free, the boy's life started to change in small but meaningful ways. At first it was the little things. Riding to school had always been a challenge because his old bike often broke down and he had to walk long stretches. But now, with the bike working perfectly, he could arrive on time every day. He no longer had to worry about being late or falling behind in class, and it gave him a sense of independence he had never felt before. The freedom of being able to move around easily made him feel stronger, braver, and more capable. The boy's friends noticed the change too. They saw him riding smoothly through the streets, waving at neighbors, carrying small errands for others, and helping younger children learn to ride their bikes. They began to admire his determination and his kindness. Some of them teased him at first, saying that he would soon ruin the bike or that it was too good for someone like him, but he paid no attention to them. Instead, he remembered the mechanic's words. "Take care of it, and when you get the chance, help someone else." Those words had stuck with him, echoing in his mind like a quiet promise he wanted to keep. At school, the boy started paying more attention to his lessons. Without the worry of a broken bike slowing him down, he could focus better and his confidence grew. He began to answer questions in class, helped his classmates with small tasks, and showed an eagerness to learn that surprised his teachers. One day his teacher noticed him helping a younger student with reading and smiled. "You have a kind heart," she said quietly. "Never forget that. Kindness and knowledge together can take you far." The boy thought about the mechanic often during those school days. He didn't have much in the way of material things, but he felt rich in the sense that someone had cared enough to help him, without expecting anything in return. He began to see the world differently. People who were struggling didn't have to remain stuck in hardship. Sometimes a single act of generosity could change everything. The mechanic had given him not just a working bike, but also a lesson in humanity, one that the boy started carrying with him everywhere he went. He began looking for ways to help others, even in small, simple ways. If he saw an elderly neighbor struggling to carry water from the street pump, he would rush to help. If a younger child needed someone to teach them how to ride a bike, he would take the time to guide them patiently. It wasn't anything dramatic, nothing that would make headlines, but it made a difference. Slowly, the neighborhood began to notice his efforts. People started respecting him for his helpfulness, his steady nature, and his willingness to do what was right even when nobody was watching. The mechanic, meanwhile, continued to work quietly in his small shop. He never knew the full impact of his actions, and he never asked for recognition. But the boy's life was gradually being shaped by the example he had set. Even small memories of the workshop, the smell of oil, the sound of tools clanging, the sight of the mechanic carefully fixing the bike, remained vivid in the boy's mind. These memories became a source of motivation. Whenever he faced a challenge, he would remember how patient and careful the mechanic had been, and he would think, "I can handle this too." As months passed, the boy's family noticed the change in him. He had always been a quiet child, often overwhelmed by the difficulties of their daily life, but now he seemed more determined, more resilient. He started helping his parents with chores, taking responsibility for small tasks around the house, and showing an understanding beyond his years. His parents were proud, even if they didn't always have the words to express it. They could see that the boy had grown in ways that couldn't be measured with money or possessions. At school, the boy also began dreaming bigger. Before, he had only thought about the next day, the next meal, the next school assignment. But now he allowed himself to imagine a future where he could change things, where he could help others like the mechanic had helped him. He dreamed of learning skills, earning money, and perhaps even returning to the neighborhood one day to make life easier for people who struggled like he once had. He didn't know how it would happen, but he believed that the world could be better, and he wanted to be part of that change. Sometimes he would ride his bike to the mechanic's shop just to watch him work. He never asked questions unless the mechanic offered to teach him. Slowly, he began to learn small things about tools, engines, and problem solving. He discovered that fixing a bike, a machine, or even a simple engine required patience, attention, and care. More than the technical skills, he learned the value of dedication, hard work, and doing things with a sense of purpose. He realized that the mechanic's generosity wasn't just about money or time, it was about teaching a lesson in life. The boy also started noticing patterns in the world around him. He saw neighbors arguing over small things, children fighting over toys, and people who were struggling but unwilling to ask for help. He began to understand that life could be hard for everyone, but that small gestures of kindness could make the burden lighter. The mechanic had shown him that a single person could make a difference, and now he wanted to try that himself. Every time he helped someone, no matter how small the act, he felt a spark of joy, a reminder that he was carrying forward the lesson he had learned. One day, a younger boy from his school came running to him with a broken bicycle chain. The boy remembered exactly how he had felt when he had first approached the mechanic. He knelt down, carefully inspected the bike, and patiently helped fix the chain with the small tools he had borrowed from home. When the younger boy thanked him, he smiled warmly and said, "Take care of it, and when you get a chance, help someone else." The words felt like a circle completing itself. The boy realized that the mechanic's lesson was spreading, even in small ways, through the actions he was taking every day. Time moved on, and the boy's connection to the mechanic deepened, though it remained quiet and simple. He would visit the shop occasionally, not just for help with his bike, but to watch the man work, to learn from his patience and skill. The mechanic never pushed him to learn faster or to be perfect. He simply allowed the boy to absorb what he could. That quiet encouragement gave the boy confidence in himself. He began to believe that he could tackle challenges on his own, just as the mechanic had tackled the bike that had once seemed impossible to fix. The boy's attitude started to influence others in the neighborhood. Friends who had once been careless about their belongings, their studies, or their behavior began to notice his dedication and kindness. Some of them started helping each other more, inspired by his example. Even adults began to see him differently. not just as a poor boy struggling to get by, but as someone who had grown into a young person of character, someone who could be relied upon, someone who might one day make a real difference. Even with all these changes, life was still not easy. Money was tight, school books were scarce, and there were days when the boy felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. But whenever he felt discouraged, he would remember the day the mechanic had fixed his bike for free, the care with which he had worked, and the lesson he had shared without speaking too much. It reminded him that even in difficult circumstances there were people who cared, and that small acts could ripple into something much larger. By the time another year passed, the boy had fully embraced the lessons of patience, generosity, and responsibility. The bike had become more than a tool for moving around. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that one act of kindness could change the direction of a life. And every time he rode it, he felt a connection to the mechanic, a quiet gratitude that motivated him to keep going, to keep learning, and to keep helping others whenever he could. Even the smallest victories felt meaningful. Learning a new lesson in school, helping someone in the neighborhood, or successfully repairing a friend's bicycle, all of these moments were milestones. The boy realized that life didn't need grand gestures to matter. Small, consistent acts of kindness and effort could build something extraordinary over time. He began to imagine a future where he could do something even bigger, where he could make a real difference in the lives of others, just like the mechanic had done for him. The boy's story, quiet and humble as it was, became a living example in the neighborhood of how one simple act of generosity could ripple outward and influence lives in ways no one could predict. The mechanic had unknowingly sown the seeds, and the boy, through his determination and kindness, began to nurture them, ensuring that the lesson of hope, care, and humanity would grow. And though the boy did not yet know what the future held, he carried within him a belief stronger than fear, stronger than hardship. He believed that one day he would be able to repay the kindness that had changed him, not just with words, but with actions that could truly make a difference in someone else's life. As the boy grew older, life became more complicated. Schoolwork became harder, responsibilities at home grew, and the world around him seemed increasingly demanding. The neighborhood had its own struggles, families fighting for money, children running errands instead of studying, and opportunities for growth were scarce. Yet the boy, now a young teenager, held on to the lessons he had learned from the mechanic years ago. The memory of that day, when his broken bike had been fixed without a price, became a steady source of strength. It reminded him that even in a world that often seemed unfair, there were people who acted out of kindness, and that every act, no matter how small, mattered. Even as life became more difficult, the boy refused to give in to despair. Some mornings he would wake up to find that there was barely enough to eat, or that there were errands he had to run for his family before even stepping out to school. On such days, the weight on his shoulders felt unbearable. But he had learned patience, perseverance, and determination from watching the mechanic work. These lessons carried him forward. He would take a deep breath, fix his shirt, and push forward, refusing to let circumstances dictate his life. School became a place of both challenge and opportunity. While some students came from families with more resources, the boy had to work harder to catch up. Books and supplies were expensive, and tutors were out of reach. Yet he discovered that knowledge could be found everywhere, not just in classrooms. He listened closely to teachers, borrowed old books from neighbors, and learned from life itself. Sometimes he would observe the older mechanics and tradespeople in the neighborhood, noticing how they solved problems, repaired objects, and approached difficulties. He realized that learning was not just about memorizing facts, it was about observing, understanding, and applying lessons in practical ways. The boy also faced the reality that life could be unfair. There were days when he failed tests, when he was mocked for his worn-out shoes, and when he felt invisible among peers who had more than he did. On some occasions, he wanted to give up. Yet, whenever despair crept in, he remembered the mechanic's kindness. He recalled how that one act had given him the chance to continue riding his bike, to reach school, and to believe that he could achieve more. That memory became a shield against discouragement. It reminded him that even when life seemed stacked against him, he had the power to keep moving forward. Work outside school also became a part of his life. To support his family, he took on small jobs whenever he could, running errands, carrying packages, or helping neighbors with odd tasks. These jobs were not glamorous, nor were they highly paid, but they taught him responsibility, discipline, and the value of earning one's way. He learned how to interact with different people, how to be reliable, and how to maintain his dignity even when performing difficult or exhausting work. Every coin he earned felt like a small victory, and every smile of appreciation he received reinforced his belief in the goodness of human connection. Despite these pressures, he continued to carry the lessons of kindness and generosity. He noticed people around him struggling in silence. Sometimes it was a neighbor who couldn't afford proper school supplies, sometimes a younger child who had broken their bike, or an elderly person who needed help carrying water. Whenever he could, he stepped in. These acts were small, sometimes almost invisible, but they were consistent. They reflected the values the mechanic had instilled in him, that life was not just about surviving, but about helping others along the way. The boy's relationship with the mechanic remained subtle yet meaningful. He visited the shop occasionally, observing quietly, sometimes helping with minor tasks when asked. The mechanic never pushed him or demanded perfection. He simply allowed the boy to learn at his own pace, offering encouragement when needed and showing through example that careful, honest work was its own reward. Over time, the boy began to understand that success was not just about wealth or recognition, but about integrity, resilience, and the ability to face challenges with courage and thoughtfulness. Life was also teaching him lessons in failure. There were times when the bike he had learned to maintain broke again. There were times when a task he attempted for someone else didn't succeed. He faced criticism from peers and adults, felt the sting of disappointment, and sometimes questioned whether his efforts made any difference. But each time he remembered the mechanic's words that patience, persistence, and care mattered more than immediate results. Slowly, he learned that setbacks were not the end, but part of the journey. Mistakes were opportunities to grow, to learn, and to become stronger. By the time he was in his mid-teens, the boy began thinking seriously about the future. He no longer imagined only small acts of kindness. He began dreaming of bigger possibilities. He wanted to study, to acquire skills, and to create opportunities for himself and his family. He imagined a life where he could provide help to others in a more substantial way, where he could give back to the neighborhood and make a tangible difference. The vision seemed distant, almost unreachable, yet it fueled him with determination. Each day became a step toward that goal, no matter how small. Education became a focus. Though resources were limited, he made use of every opportunity. He studied at home by candlelight when electricity was scarce. He borrowed notebooks from classmates and teachers, sometimes copying entire lessons word for word to ensure he had the knowledge he needed. He asked questions, observed carefully, and pushed himself to understand concepts beyond the classroom. His determination set him apart. Teachers began to notice his persistence, his curiosity, and the quiet wisdom in his actions. He wasn't the smartest student in the room, but his dedication and willingness to work hard earned him respect and recognition. The boy also understood the importance of balancing responsibility with care for himself. There were moments when he wanted to rest, to play, or simply to enjoy life without worry. He allowed himself small joys: a ride on his bike through the quiet streets, a conversation with a friend, a moment to watch the sunset. These moments, though brief, reminded him of the beauty of life and the importance of staying human in the face of hardship. He realized that resilience did not mean ignoring joy. It meant finding it even in difficult times. Over the years, the boy's character grew steadily. He became known in the neighborhood as someone who could be relied upon, someone who approached problems with calmness and intelligence, someone who carried himself with quiet dignity. Even those who once mocked him began to show respect. He understood that reputation was not built overnight, nor could it be demanded. It was earned through consistent action, integrity, and the choices made in everyday life. And every choice he made carried the echo of the mechanic's influence, reminding him that small acts of care and attention could grow into something powerful. By the time he was nearing adulthood, the boy had faced enough hardship to understand the value of perseverance and the power of kindness. He had experienced failure, disappointment, and struggle, but he had also seen the impact of generosity, hard work, and integrity. The mechanic's act of fixing a broken bike for free had been a turning point, a spark that guided him through years of challenges. He began to understand that life was not just about surviving, but about using the lessons learned to create opportunities, not only for oneself but for others as well. Even now, as he worked to support his family, study, and plan for the future, he kept the promise he had made to himself to carry forward the kindness that had shaped him. Whether it was helping a neighbor, guiding a younger child, or simply offering a word of encouragement, he acted consistently, quietly, and without expectation. He understood that true impact came not from grand gestures, but from steady, repeated efforts to make life better for those around him. And yet, a part of him always wondered what the future held. He remembered the mechanic, wondering if he would ever be able to repay the kindness that had changed the course of his life. He imagined a time when he could give back, when he could express gratitude in a way that mattered, and when he could show that even a single act of generosity could ripple through time and change the life of someone entirely. That hope, quiet but persistent, motivated him every day. By the end of these formative years, the boy had transformed. He was no longer a child struggling to keep a broken bike moving. He had become a young man with skills, knowledge, compassion, and vision. He had faced life's challenges head-on, learned from failure, and cultivated a character shaped by kindness, determination, and integrity. He carried the lessons of the mechanic with him, allowing them to guide his choices, influence his actions, and inspire his dreams. He didn't yet know the full extent of what lay ahead. The world remained uncertain and new challenges would come. But he had learned that life could be changed through patience, courage, and care. He had learned that kindness, once given, could grow quietly in ways that might take years to fully reveal. And he had learned that every step forward, no matter how small, brought him closer to the future he imagined. A future where he could repay the generosity that had shaped his life and continue the cycle of hope, care, and human connection. Years passed, and the boy, now a young man, had grown into someone who carried both resilience and ambition in his heart. The lessons from his childhood, the struggles he had faced, and the quiet inspiration of the mechanic's generosity had shaped him in ways that went far beyond fixing a bike. Every hardship, every small victory, and every act of kindness he had witnessed or performed had built the foundation of the person he was becoming. And now, with adulthood approaching, the young man began to take his first steps toward a life he had once only dreamed about. He started by seeking opportunities that others might have overlooked. While many in his neighborhood settled into routine work or accepted that life would not offer more, he refused to stop at survival. He applied himself to learning new skills, seeking knowledge wherever he could find it, and working in jobs that allowed him to grow. He did not have the advantages of wealth or connections, but he had determination, patience, and the understanding that consistent effort often outweighed immediate luck. Small steps became significant achievements over time. He found a part-time job at a local workshop, assisting with repairs and learning technical skills that would serve him for years to come. He treated every task with care, whether it was cleaning tools, carrying supplies, or observing senior mechanics at work. Slowly, he gained confidence and proficiency. He realized that his childhood experiences with the mechanic had prepared him for this moment. The patience he had learned, the focus he had developed, and the understanding of care and precision had made him a natural at the work he once only admired from a distance. Education also became a priority. He continued to study, sometimes late into the night, borrowing books, using public resources, and seeking guidance whenever possible. He understood that knowledge was a powerful tool, one that could open doors to opportunities far beyond what he had imagined. He learned about business, communication, and skills that could help him build a future not just for himself, but for the people around him. The young man realized that success was not measured only by money or status, but by the ability to make a positive impact and create a stable, meaningful life. Along the way, he faced setbacks, as life rarely moves in a straight line. Some projects failed, some opportunities fell through, and at times, he questioned whether his efforts would ever be enough. Yet he never gave up. He drew strength from the memory of the mechanic, remembering the day his bike had been fixed, the act of kindness that had lit a spark of hope in his life, and the promise he had made to himself to carry that lesson forward. Every challenge became a chance to apply what he had learned about patience, resilience, and persistence. Over time, his efforts began to bear fruit. He saved money from his work, invested in tools and materials, and gradually started a small business of his own. He offered services to the neighborhood, helping people with repairs, maintenance, and other tasks that required skill and trustworthiness. Word spread about his reliability, skill, and honesty, Neighbors who had once known him as a quiet boy now respected him as a young man of integrity and determination. He began to see that success was not just personal. It was about the influence he could have on others, the trust he could earn, and the good he could create in his community. The young man also began to think about the larger impact he could make. He remembered how small acts of kindness had shaped his own life, and realized that he had the ability to do the same for others. He started mentoring younger boys in the neighborhood, teaching them skills, guiding them toward education, and showing them the importance of patience, hard work, and integrity. Each success, no matter how small, reminded him of the mechanic's gift, the lesson that had set him on this path. He understood that true success was not measured solely by what he achieved, but by the positive change he inspired in others. Despite his growing success, he never forgot his family. He helped support them financially, ensuring that his parents could live with a little more comfort and that his siblings had better opportunities than he had. Yet he did not do this out of obligation alone. He did it with care, respect, and humility, knowing that giving back to those who had nurtured him was part of the cycle of kindness he had been taught. His family began to see him not just as a hardworking young man, but as someone who could bridge the gap between dreams and reality, someone who carried hope wherever he went. Over time, his business expanded, and with it, his vision for life. He no longer saw himself as a boy constrained by circumstance. He had the skills, knowledge, and determination to shape his own future. But even as he achieved these milestones, one thought never left his mind: the mechanic. The man who had fixed a broken bike for free had given him more than a machine. He had given him a chance, a perspective, and the belief that life could change for the better. The young man knew that he would never be truly complete until he found a way to repay that debt. Not because he owed money, but because gratitude demanded action. One day, while reviewing his progress, the young man realized that he was ready. He had achieved stability, skill, and a reputation for honesty and reliability. He had the means to make a meaningful gesture, one that could honor the mechanic's influence in his life. He began planning quietly, thinking about how he could reconnect, how he could show appreciation, and how he could ensure that the man's legacy of kindness was recognized and celebrated. He wanted the mechanic to understand that a single act of generosity had created ripples far beyond what anyone could have imagined. In the meantime, he also continued helping his community. He knew that success was not truly valuable if it was only for oneself. He invested in local schools, supported children who struggled with books or supplies, and offered mentorship for those trying to follow their own paths. The lessons from the mechanic, the lessons of care, patience, and generosity, were now becoming part of the young man's life philosophy. Each act of giving reinforced the cycle of kindness, demonstrating how one person's choice to help could echo through years and generations. As the young man prepared to make his move, he felt a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and gratitude. He had long dreamed of this day, the day he could finally return to the mechanic and express what words alone could not convey. He wanted to show that the man's kindness had changed the course of his life, had inspired him to persevere through hardships, and had set him on a path toward success, integrity, and the ability to help others. It was a moment he had anticipated for years, a culmination of effort, hope, and the enduring belief that human generosity could transform lives. Finally, the day came. He packed his tools, some gifts, and a letter of thanks, though he knew no words could fully capture the gratitude he felt. He made his way through the streets of his neighborhood, now familiar yet still holding memories of childhood struggles, small victories, and moments of growth. Every step brought him closer to the mechanic's shop, closer to the man who had unknowingly planted the seeds of his future. As he approached the shop, he saw the familiar corrugated roof, the worn walls, and the smell of oil and metal that had been there all those years. The mechanic was inside, focused on his work as usual, unaware of the young man's arrival. The sight brought back a flood of memories: the day the bike was fixed, the small lessons in patience and care, and the quiet inspiration that had fueled years of effort and growth. The young man took a deep breath, steadying his emotions, and stepped inside. When the mechanic looked up, he paused. He did not immediately recognize the young man who now stood before him, confident and accomplished. But as recognition dawned, his eyes widened and a smile slowly spread across his face. The man could hardly believe what he was seeing. The boy whose bike he had fixed so many years ago had grown into someone remarkable. Someone shaped not just by circumstance, but by care, determination, and a commitment to doing good. The young man spoke first, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've come to thank you. Years ago, you fixed my bike when I had nothing to give. You didn't just fix a machine, you gave me hope, a chance, and a lesson that has guided me through life. I wanted you to know that your kindness changed me, and I've tried to honor it in everything I've done." The mechanic listened quietly, emotion flickering across his face. He never expected recognition, never imagined that a simple act would ripple through time in such profound ways. Yet here it was, living proof of the impact of generosity. The young man continued, offering support for the mechanic, gifts and words of gratitude, all of which the man received with quiet humility. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. The mechanic saw the fruit of his quiet kindness. The boy he had once helped now grown into a man who carried forward the lessons of patience, care, and generosity. And the young man understood that life's greatest gifts were not material. They were the values, lessons and acts of human connection that shaped character and inspired action. From that moment forward, the young man continued to build his life, always guided by the principle that kindness mattered, that generosity could change lives, and that every effort to help someone else could create ripples far beyond imagination. And the mechanic, quietly proud, knew that he had played a small but vital part in a story that was still unfolding. A story that proved the power of human compassion and the enduring influence of a single act of kindness. The young man stood outside the small workshop, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Time had passed, yet the smell of oil and metal was just as he remembered. It was the same workshop where a simple act of kindness had changed the course of his life. The corrugated roof, the worn walls, and the small workbench cluttered with tools. All of it brought back memories of a boy who had once arrived with a broken bike and a heart full of uncertainty. Now, standing there as a grown man, he felt a mixture of excitement, gratitude, and a quiet nervousness. Inside, the mechanic looked up from his workbench. For a moment, he didn't recognize the young man standing before him. The boy who had come years ago with patched clothes and uncertain eyes had grown into a confident, capable man. His posture was straight, his movement sure, and his eyes carried the same warmth and honesty that the mechanic had remembered all those years ago. Recognition slowly dawned on the mechanic's face, and he paused, holding the wrench in his hand. I remember you," the mechanic said quietly, a smile forming at the corners of his mouth. "You were just a boy with a broken bike." The young man smiled back, a wave of emotion rising in his chest. "Yes, sir. I was that boy. And I've come to thank you, not just for fixing my bike, but for everything that came after, for teaching me without even knowing it that kindness can change a life." The mechanic set down his tools, his eyes shining with quiet emotion. "I didn't do much," he said, almost apologetically. "I just fixed a bike. That's all."